أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال الله تعالى في القرآن الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم عند الله عليم خبير صدق الله العظيم. And that verse translates as follows: O mankind, surely we have created you from a male and a female and made you tribes and families that you may know each other. Surely the noblest of you in the sight of Allah is the one who keeps their duty the most. Surely Allah is knowing and aware. Chapter 49, Al-Hujurat, verse 13. قال الله تعالى في القرآن الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن آياته خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم إن في ذلك لآيات للعالمين صدق الله العظيم. And that verse translates as follows: and of His signs, in other words, the signs of the existence of Allah, is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your tongues and colors. Surely there are signs on this for the learned people. Chapter 30, Ar-Rum, verse 22. I'm continuing with the subject of last Friday's Khutba. In that Khutba, I dealt with this hadith: seek knowledge, even if it be in China, because the seeking of knowledge is a duty upon every Muslim. I showed in that Khutba that although the first part of this hadith about seeking knowledge, even if it requires going as far as China, although this first part cannot be reliably traced to the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, yet this same idea in general terms is supported by the Holy Quran. The Quran says that people should travel in the earth to gain knowledge of His creation. Obviously, the earth includes China. I also showed from history that China was known to the companions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, certainly in the time when Hazrat Usman was Khalifa. It is therefore quite plausible that the Holy Prophet Muhammad might have said, seek knowledge even if it be in China. Now in this khutbah, I have read out two more verses of the Quran which clearly imply that humans must travel to acquire knowledge. According to the first verse, humanity consists of different nations and ethnic groups, and their differences constitute their identities. The only way, as the Holy Quran says, the only way to know each other and identify each other is by traveling in the world to visit and see the different nations which inhabit the earth. Knowledge about different nations cannot be acquired by sitting at home or going no further than the borders of your own country. And this verse addresses all humanity as it begins with Ya ayyuhan nasu, O mankind. And of course, what it is suggesting for all humans, suggesting that they should gain knowledge of each other, this also applies to Muslims, that they also should seek knowledge of the different nations of the world and what they are like. According to the second verse, the diversity and variety of the languages and colors of mankind, that diversity provides signs of the existence of God, and those signs, as it says, are for the learned ones. They are the ones who see those signs, the learned ones, the alimin, or the plural of alim. So this diversity is a source of knowledge, or source of ilm, as we call it. Again, it is obvious that to acquire knowledge about the languages and colors of mankind, you would have to travel among different nations. There are also hadith reports speaking highly of traveling in search of knowledge. In Sahih Muslim, in a long hadith which mentions various qualities of the believers, the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is reported as saying, "Whoever treads a path in search of knowledge, Allah would make it easy for him through it, the path to paradise." And this part, which I've just read from a long hadith in Sahih Muslim, this part also occurs as a hadith by itself in Tirmizi, that whoever treads a path in search of knowledge, Allah will make it easy for him through it, through that path, the path to paradise. So traveling along a path physically in this world to seek knowledge is like an exercise or a practice which makes it easier to walk along the road to paradise. What is meant, of course, is that by your journeys in the world, you learn lessons which increase your faith and make you a better person. In the collection of Ibn Majah, there is this following hadith: whenever anyone goes out of his house, leaving it in order to seek knowledge, the angels lower their wings in approval of what he is doing. And again in Tirmizi, we read the hadith, whoever goes out seeking knowledge, he is in Allah's way. The words for Allah's way are in Allah's way are fi sabilillah. He is in Allah's way until he returns. And this means that in going out to seek knowledge, he is performing an act in Allah's way. There is a well-known hadith also in Tirmizi in which the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, the word of wisdom is the lost property of the believer. So wherever he finds it, he has a better right to it. So you see, when someone finds lost property, the question arises, who's got the right to it? And this believer who finds it has a better right to it. And Maulana Muhammad Ali has included this hadith in his well-known book, A Manual of Hadith. And he commented on it as follows, and I read out his comment. This hadith lays down upon every Muslim the obligation of acquiring knowledge. Hikmah means wisdom or knowledge, and zalla means a lost animal or an object of persevering quest. In other words, an object in whose quest you persevere. So that the believer should set out in search of knowledge as perseveringly as the owner of a lost animal would search for it. So that's Maulana Muhammad Ali's note on this hadith. Now, to search for something which you have lost, you will go everywhere where there is a possibility that it may be found. You will search not only open spaces, but you will search concealed places as well. You will turn things over to look under them. And to find your lost possession, as the saying goes, you will leave no stone unturned. Of course, knowledge which you find somewhere is not like a thing which previously was in your possession and you misplaced it and lost it. In fact, it is something new which was not in your knowledge before. So what is meant really is that you must look for knowledge with the same eagerness and urgency with which you try to find your lost property. So again, if a Muslim follows this hadith, then he would travel all over the world to find knowledge. Now, regarding seeking knowledge, even if it be in China, it is a historical fact that the early Muslims brought knowledge and inventions that existed in China. They brought them, they developed them further for their own use, and then through the Islamic world, these things were passed to Europe. And after coming to Europe, this knowledge was instrumental in creating the modern science-based Western civilization. Now, we all know what paper is. I've got some papers in front of me. Paper on which writing and printing is done is a prime example of something which Muslims got from China. Paper was invented in China long before Islam, and it was in use in China. The writing material used at that time in the Middle East and as available to Muslims when Islam came, that material was rare and expensive and awkward to write on. And this limited the spread of literacy and knowledge in the world. And it also hindered the efficient running of institutions such as the government, and it held back economic progress. The scarcity of writing material and the difficulty of writing on it. Now, it so happened that in the year 751, which was 120 years after the Holy Prophet's death, when Islam had spread into Central Asia, there was a battle between Muslims and the Chinese Tang dynasty of the time, which took place at the western end of the Chinese Empire. The western end of the Chinese Empire then, roughly if you go to the Pakistan-Chinese border now and then go straight due north, leaving Pakistan, then somewhere there is the western end of the Chinese Empire of that time. The Muslims won the battle and they captured Chinese prisoners of war. It is said that these prisoners brought the art of paper making to the notice of the Muslims. As I've said, paper was a much better material to write on. It was easier to mass produce, and it was cheaper than the earlier materials available to the Muslims. Muslims adopted paper production. But not only this, they also modified and improved this process and produced their own kind of paper. So, knowledge of paper production was not just knowledge of its own, going no further than people being able to produce paper, but it was revolutionary for the transmission of knowledge itself. In other words, what Muslims learned from China was not just knowledge itself and on its own, but a way of spreading all kinds of knowledge. Perhaps this is why the saying of the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and this saying was no doubt inspired by Allah, perhaps this is why that saying specifically mentioned China, meaning that not only was knowledge to be found there, but more than that, it would be knowledge that would enable you to spread knowledge more widely. And then Muslims went on to establish the first paper mills in Spain when they ruled Spain. And from there, paper manufacture then spread into Europe. And at that time in Europe, that type of paper was known as Arab paper or Islamic paper. I came across an academic research article published in 2018 by a researcher at a university in Canada, and its title was The Adoption of Paper in the Middle East Between the Years 700 and 1300 AD. We are now in 2023 AD. In the conclusion in that article, the author gives a quotation from someone else, and that someone else said this: technological innovation will not occur in a society which is malnourished, superstitious, or extremely traditional, with tight social constraints preventing it from being open to diversity and tolerance. So the author quotes someone who's written this, and then the author himself adds this: early Islamic society represented just the reverse of what is in that quotation. The author says, Islamic society reached into a pool of existing cultural heritage and knowledge and developed tools to exploit local and international scholarly traditions. It was an ethnic mix which displayed tolerance of diversity, and that was a condition necessary for technical innovation to occur. Together, these were infrastructures that made Islamic society more disposed to adopt, implement, benefit, and generate technological innovation on its own. So that is what that author writes. So, continuing with this khutbah, it is therefore sad and tragic to note that the development of knowledge went into decline in the Islamic world some 400 to 500 years ago. There's a journal called The New Atlantis, and I read in it an article going back to 2011 about this decline, the decline of knowledge in the Islamic world. And that article says, and I quote from it, the disparity between the intellectual achievements of the Middle East between the 8th and the 13th centuries and now, particularly there, the disparity compared with the rest of the world, that is staggering indeed. So, what it means is there's a huge disparity in the 8th through the 13th century. In other words, Muslims are far ahead compared to the rest of the world. And now they are far behind. And the author goes on to say, today, however, the spirit of science in the Muslim world is as dry as the desert. So having quoted these authors, perhaps we can see in a new light the words of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which I quoted above, and I repeat, the word of wisdom is the lost property of the believer, the mu'min. So wherever he finds it, he has a better right to it. Muslims have lost the knowledge which they would have possessed if they had continued on the path of enlightenment which the Holy Quran and the Holy Prophet Muhammad set them on. That lost property was inherited largely by the Western world. Muslims had a better right to it, as that hadith says. Muslims had a better right to it, but they gave up their right by their lack of concern and lack of interest. So, far from going to search for knowledge, quite the opposite of that, when the modern branches of knowledge were brought to the doorstep of the Muslims, in the Indian subcontinent during British rule of India, modern branches of knowledge were brought, I repeat, to their doorstep, they were greatly reluctant to accept it. 150 years ago, at the start of that time, the Muslim religious leaders, certainly in the Indian subcontinent, declared it as un-Islamic to undertake the Western form of education and to learn the English language. As a result, Muslims of the Indian subcontinent suffered deep and long-lasting damage, whose effects still exist even now. So perhaps this may be why the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam urged Muslims to seek knowledge, even if it were to be found in China, because he might have meant that there is nothing wrong in accepting knowledge from non-Muslim nations, which may be why he mentioned China. So may Allah enable Muslims to follow the very vital, wise and beneficial guidance of the Holy Quran and of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this respect of going forth to seek knowledge. Ameen. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quranil Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim. Innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malikun barurur rahim.